Hi, everyone. Today on the Writing Gym podcast, we're talking with poet Jennifer Martelli. You're going to walk away with specific tips on not only writing poetry, but writing practices to keep your writing strong. If you want a free download that's not only fun, but informative, check out our cheat sheet about strengthening your craft at www.writing-gym.com/poet.
Welcome to the Writing Gym podcast. We're here to pump up your writing. And now your host, Andy Brixey, personal trainer at the Writing Gym.
Hi, I'm Andy, personal trainer at the Writing Gym. Welcome to Tricep Dips with Jennifer Martelli. I'm excited to introduce you to this week's guest, but first, a word from our sponsor, the Writing Gym. You know, you could break free from feeling like your writing is never good enough. You could write freely and achieve your publishing dreams. You're tired of rejection and lying awake till 2 a.m. wondering how you could have fixed your manuscript. Wallowing in self-doubt is not getting you any closer to your writing goals. You need real standards, real support, and real change. Are you ready to transform your writing and take it from the slush pile to publishable? We are currently accepting select writers in the Writing Gym. Visit www.writing-gym.com to apply. And now I'd like to introduce our resident writing coach, the gal who helps you pump your writing into shape in the Writing Gym. Welcome back to the Writing Gym podcast, Annalisa Parent.
It is always a pleasure to be here with you, Andy Brixey.
So this week, guys, I have a fun little story straight out of school about Annalisa. She used to live in a French-speaking dorm in college where everyone was supposed to speak French all of the time. It didn't really work out as planned, though, and there were more Russian speakers on her floor than French speakers. Even her roommate was Russian, and she even picked up enough words for some basic conversation, and she remembers some of them. Can you give us a little Russian sentence, perhaps, Annalisa?
Oh, a sentence is pushing it, but I can say "Привет," which is hello.
Oh.
And, I did meet a Russian couple when I was in Kenya, and the wife spoke fluent English and the husband did not. So I spoke to him a little bit in Russian, enough that he sort of understood the gist of what we were talking about. That felt good to me. I felt good about that.
That's pretty fantastic. And now to tell you a little bit about our lovely guest this week. Jennifer Martelli was born and raised in Massachusetts and graduated from Boston University and the Warren Wilson MFA program for writers. She's taught high school English as well as women's literature at Emerson College in Boston. She has been a poet for over 20 years. Her work has appeared or will appear in the following publications: the Denver Quarterly, Folio, Calliope, the Mississippi Review, the Bellingham Review, Kindred, Bitterzoet, Zigzag Folio, the Inflectionist Review, Sugared Water, Slippery Elm, Tar River Review, and Bop Dead City. She was a finalist for the Sue Elkine Poetry Prize and a recipient of the Massachusetts Cultural Council Grant in Poetry. Her chapbook, Apostrophe, was published in 2011 by Big Table Publishing Company. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Wow, Jennifer, that is quite a list of accomplishments. Tell us more about how you got to such a prevalent rank as a poet. This is amazing.
Well, it sounds a lot like more condensed than it really was. After I got my MFA, which was in the early 90s, I started sending work out and I was writing. I was in a writing community in Cambridge. And had some success, and then started having kids. I moved out to the suburbs. I unplugged from the writing community, which I suggest no one does. And I really was away for about 15 years or so, and it's been the past 5 or 6 years that I just got tired of not writing and immersed myself back into a community up here on the North Shore now. I made that commitment. I said, I'm just going to write. I'm going to be in a group. I'm going to send stuff out and, just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks,
That's great. So you're in Massachusetts right now.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Yeah, I picked up on the accent because I'm a native New Englander. But
what accent? I thought.
I'm from I'm sure my cousins are all in Rhode Island, so, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not here for it.
I've been
Yes,
practicing my hours, but
I love it. Tell us about what style of poetry you write. Are we talking about long poems, short poems, rhyming poems? People always ask me these questions.
right, sure.
Best way to write poetry. Tell us what you write.
I mean, I guess I would have to call it free verse. So it's not rhyming. I don't generally write in form. I won't say I never write in form if for some reason, sometimes as a writing prompt in my writing group might say, let's all like do a sonnet or let's do, a villanelle. But in general, no, I don't. I rarely ever write a long poem. That's sort of a project of mine this summer, write a happy poem and write a long
Mm-hmm.
But in general, I guess you'd have to call it more lyrical poetry, it's sort of in the moment, as opposed to these long narratives. I don't think I do it very well, so I tend not to do that.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up the sonnet and the villanelle. So I've had some poetry published, not to the level that you have, but one of the things that I liked about those fixed forms is how they really inspire creativity in a completely
Right.
way, whereas free verse sometimes feels like a free-for-all and can inspire writer's block, poet's block, I'm not sure
Yes.
what
Yes.
to call it. But how does that work for you when you work with one of those fixed forms? How does that help you to reach inspiration?
I agree with you 100%. I feel the same way when I'm given that challenge, or if I even put that challenge on myself to say, I have to write this in 14 lines, or I have to do a sestina and stick to these 6 end words. It does. It forces you, first of all, to look at the line and to look at each and every word. That everything has to be this conscious choice when you're writing in form. And I think you're right. That's a risk with free verse. It can almost be overwhelming. Is my poem done? Is my line done? I'll just use this word as opposed to a word that has to fit because of the meter or the rhyme scheme into the poem. I think it's a great exercise, even if I don't stick with that form in the final version of the poem. I think it forces me to do things in the poem that I wouldn't ordinarily do. So,
Yeah, I agree with that. And the other thing that it really helps with is line breaks, right? This is
Oh,
a lot
yeah.
of people ask me, like, where do you break a line?
Right.
I mean, if we're talking free verse, like, where do you want to break the line, right? So how do you approach that question of line breaks? What's your thinking or rule that you use for yourself?
That's an amazing question. In fact, I'm going to be doing a talk on that in the fall. This is one of the biggest problems. In fact, about 6 months ago, I said to my friends, I don't understand what a line in poetry is anymore. So this is just my history with it. I tend to write a longer line. So, which is fine. I mean, Walt Whitman wrote long lines. Not that I'm Walt Whitman, but there's definitely a precedence for that. But what happens is, especially now, with online poetry, you have a lot of really good online journals, or even, print poems. The editors can't fit the whole line on a page. So that causes a problem. So I have to make a decision now. Do I cut the line? Do I make them shorter so they will fit? Do I just say, just let it wrap around, but then it doesn't look like the poem that I originally wrote? Line breaks are elusive and elusive to me a lot of times. Sometimes I know exactly when to break a line, but other times I really, you know what I mean? I have to bring it to somebody and say, what do you think? I mean, there's a line. I've brought poems, the exact same poem with short lines and then long lines. So just tell me which one you think is better. But it's really some people say it's the length of a breath. There's all different, if you're not counting beats, as you say, if you're not writing a formal poem, you sort of got to go with your gut with that sometimes. And it works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, well, and I love hearing an established poet such as yourself really grapple with that, because I think a lot of beginning poets or people who want to be poets think
Right.
it's some kind of rule that they haven't figured out yet. And poetry is just one of those forms where, it's complicated and
Right.
you follow the rules and write a sonnet or a villanelle or a sestina,
Right.
follow a form, or, there's this opportunity for kind of a free-for-all, which is great, except
Mhm.
no rules. You have a lot of decisions to make as the artist.
Exactly. How is the white space working? And now, I mean, I think this is a wonderful thing. I mean, it's sort of an exciting time in poetry. There's this rise of, these really like almost found forms, listicle poems where you're just listing things. The prose poem where you're not breaking lines, where you have to rely on a different rhythm, within the sentence. I love all that. I think that's great. I think the more choices we have, the better. But as you say, it can be overwhelming and almost paralyzing at times.
So I have a confession to make. I subscribe to the New Yorker specifically because I like to read what people are publishing now, what is considered good writing.
Right.
I read 90-something% of the poems in the New Yorker and I walk away just shaking my head.
Yeah.
And what just happened to me. So
Yeah.
I had a really interesting conversation with the poet laureate of Vermont sometime last year, Sidney Lee. And one of the points that he made that I thought was really poignant is in his poetic philosophy, there shouldn't ever be a poem where you walk away shaking your head saying, what did I just read? That
Right.
we have this idea of poetry as sort of this lofty thing that nobody understands. But his idea was to be grounded in
Right.
things so that no matter who you are, you can pick up a poem and get something out of it. So, where do you stand on this? When you approach a poem, what's your philosophy? How do you come to it? How much do you want the reader to kind of guess, like, wow, what does that
Right.
mean? How much do you want to ground them in a sense of place or a sense of meaning?
Right. This is why, for me anyway, having a good, strong writing group is so important, because I can write something and say, this is perfectly clear. Like, it makes perfect sense to me, So to run it by someone, I'm not as much a stickler where I have to know exactly what happened. On the other hand, though, I don't like walking away and feeling I'm dumb in some ways. And there's poems that I've read that I felt that way. I'm like, I feel like I'm just not smart enough to understand this poem. I think a poem, for me anyway, can move me in a lot of different ways. And some of it is the actual meaning of the poem. I read a poem like D.H. Lawrence's The Snake, which I should hate in so many levels because I hate snakes. I don't really like narrative poetry. And yet, to me, it's the most moving poem. I can't even get through it sometimes without, my voice cracking. It's very, exactly what's happening, not a question at all. Anybody, even, I hate to use this term, a non-poet could read it and say, oh, I love this, or I hate it, whatever. But then there are other poems that I read, or other poets, and I say to myself, I'm not getting the complete narrative here, but there's something that's happening and I'm really moved by it. I think of like Jean Valentine. I love her poetry. Now, there is a narrative there, and I never walk away feeling, she's trying to trick me or she's being purposely, hiding things from me. This is some sort of trick. There's like a metrical emotion that rises, and that works for me. And I don't need to know the whole story behind the poem. So I guess I fall somewhere in the middle, because I think that sometimes, poetry is not prose. It's not straight on storytelling. There is music to it, and there is some, what's the word I want to say? When there's ascension, there's a certain rising that I feel should happen in the best poetry. So, but I do know what you mean. I've walked away from poems and said,
what did I just read?
I don't know.
That's a really interesting point about poetry, because we all interface with poetry early on in sort of nursery rhyme type poem. And then we move into this space, and what happens, I think, for a lot of students who are in junior high school, is they've got a teacher who's going to like enlighten them on what this
yes
is. And it feels like this like special decoding that nobody knows
right.
to. And
Right.
we compound that with, a poet. You mentioned D.H. Lawrence, and he's certainly someone we could put in this category. T.S. Eliot, where we've got a lot of cultural illusions. And if you
Right.
receive the gift of receiving that culture and being really steeped in sort of Greek and Roman ancient
Right.
history, then
Right.
there are things that you need to read footnotes about to kind of
You
understand.
do. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's part of the decoding, but it shouldn't be a mystery, right? I mean, we can look at T.S. Eliot and we can figure it out if we've got good footnotes.
Right.
Got it. But
Right.
I think there's a fine balance there of obscurity,
Yep.
grounding our reader in something.
I agree with you 100%. And I think, one of my teachers who, he was probably one of the best teachers. He scared me so bad. And whenever he said he liked something of mine, I felt like I had just gotten published in the New Yorker. But Stephen Dobbins, he would say that, the speaker, what would he say? There's no credibility. I think that's the thing, that as readers of poetry, we've got to trust the voice that we're hearing, and that trust can be broken, if it's getting too illusory, if and there's nothing wrong with having to look something up or even notes at the back of the book. I kind of like that sometimes in some poetry, but to say, I don't trust where I'm going here. Now I feel like you're just kind of playing with my head. Yeah. And,
Manipulation almost.
Exactly. And the other thing you brought up, which is really interesting, and, bringing up T.S. Eliot, and I just remember those Norton anthologies with the notes on the side. But, writing today or anytime, having cultural references too, which he does, and which poets do all the time, where does that leave? Like, will these poems be timeless poems? And I guess it just comes back to how good the poetry is.
Right.
I was having this discussion, there's been with all the political stuff going on, there's a lot of political poetry lately, more than usual probably. So you say, like, in 50 years, how important will these things be? And I guess it's like any poetry of protest. If it's good poetry, that's what it comes down to.
Right.
Amen.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point too. And I don't call myself a poet, but I am a writer of poetry. And for me, whether I'm writing poetry or prose, for me, having it grounded in the reality of the human experience is what's most important to me. And I look at a poet like Mary Oliver, and I think the staying power of her poetry is that, I may never have laid in the grass and looked at a grasshopper, but boy, do I get this poem, right? I think that for me, when I read some of these poems that feel obscure to me, I don't know where to find myself.
Exactly. Yeah. And that comes back to trusting the voice. I mean, it's so funny that you bring up, especially that poem about Mary Oliver. That's what I did my thesis on in grad school, like that poem as an example of the perfect poem, this perfect blending of, I think I used like this really crazy Wallace Stevens poem. And then this, I forget the other poem, this very bland, just kind of like prose with line breaks. And she was the perfect place in the middle because there's transcendence in her poetry. I mean, she's Mary Oliver, and she, for a reason, I think she hits that sweet spot of, I get exactly what's happening. I trust you. I'm grounded. And yet something else is happening that's very personal and mystical almost. And she gets it all. She gets it all.
If I could write one line.
Oh my God.
Right?
Right. She's Mary Oliver, and that's
Well, I have been hogging you, Jennifer. I'm gonna let you.
Okay.
Well, actually, I made a note because you guys talked about something that, as someone who does not write poetry at all, you guys spoke about something that I never even considered before, and that's Jennifer, you mentioned it, the importance of the white space, the blank space in a poem. And I think that's something that, many years ago back in my college classes, was something that we discussed, but, you know, it's just something that as someone who writes, you know, science fiction fantasy, that's not anything that I've ever considered at all.
Yeah.
It's not like I look at my page and I'm like, there's a lot of white space.
Yeah.
Usually when I say there's a lot of white space here, it's because I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
But, you know, how do you kind of grapple with that? Because not only are you dealing with, you know, the kind of writer's block and like trying to, you know, develop this perfectly crafted poem, but you're also dealing with the very artistic aspect of it, about how it actually looks on a page. Like that, what kind of challenge does that bring up for you?
Well, you know, it's funny. I mean, I think a lot of this comes down to a personal aesthetic too. You know, I tend to like more space. You know, I'm not a poet who has things all over the page, but I tend to, you know, I like, say, couplets with, you know, this spacing in between. So there's, you know, a little bit room to breathe. I get a little confused, you know, with that, you know, the right margin, you know, like, where do I stop? Where do I stop? So it really, I wish I could give you an answer, because I'd write a book about it. You know? I'd go on the lecture tour. But a lot of times it's just this, as I'm writing a poem, or drafting a poem, sometimes I'm just sort of led by it. I find that when I have a better sense of what I'm writing, you know, if I have a better emotional sense of what I'm writing, I have a better sense of where to put that white space. And, you know, but there's no one rule that I have. You know, there's got to be an inch in between each thing. And then again, you know, I mean, after I had, last year, I published my first full length, and I mean, it was wonderful. But one of the things I had to deal with is, as I was saying, you know, a book of poetry is only so big physically. It's a thing. And my publisher was like, Jen, I can't get you know, I have to wrap the lines around, or we've got to break them in some way. And I'm like, I'm never going to do this again. So I went through this period where I was writing these like skinny, long poems. And I liked how they came out. Now I'm kind of getting away from that. So you know, that's how I was using the white space. I think just out of complete, you know, terror and frustration, you know, just of having to do this to so many of my poems. I'm like, no.
And I also wanted to ask you, you mentioned that you're, you know, part of a writing group and the support that lends you. That's something that Annalisa is a, you know, huge component for writers everywhere in the writing gym, because, you know, she functions as an editor and as a support system and just, you know, helping out all these writers. What is the importance of having that writing group mean to you? Why, you said, I mean, I wrote down your exact words, which were, don't unplug from the writing community, and you wouldn't be where you were without the writing group. So what has that experience been like?
Well, on the most basic level, I mean, I think it's just almost like mob mentality. If I'm around a certain group doing you know, with a certain aim, you know, that's what I will do. I mean, I guess it's like any support group, you know, any support group you go to, there's sort of a zeitgeist, you know, within the storm. So there's that. And that's showing up. That's just showing up to it, even if I have nothing to bring, even if I have, you know, this thing that I wrote that I'm embarrassed by. I'm like, I can't believe I wrote it, but I'm just going to put it out there. So there's that camaraderie and spirit that just is engendered by a group. But also, you know, to have some really smart critics, you know, who are looking at your work and saying, you know what, like this isn't working. You know, I don't get it. Like, you know, as you said, you know, about the New Yorker, like, I don't know what you're even writing about right here. And then there's also, you know, just, you know, the like tricks of the trade, you know, oh, did you see this new magazine that's come out? You know, hey, my friend is editing this anthology, you know, just kind of networking in that way. You know, hey, do you want to review my book and, you know, for this magazine, you know, that's very important too. So I mean, I guess, again, you know, the basic importance of, for me anyway, is just it keeps me in this flow of a writing community. You know, as long as I'm in it, you know, I'm in it. You know, and I might not be I'm at a period where I'm not sending out as much, or I'm not writing as much. I'm doing more revising, or I'm doing more reviewing, but I'm in it. I'm touching poetry. It's a real thing. So.
That's a really good point, Jennifer. And, one of the conversations that I frequently have with writers is around their frustration with like the free library group or something, because say they're a sci-fi writer and there are like 3 poets and 1 memoirist, one guy only shows up once a month, that, this person never, just all of those frustrations. And, I'm going to guess that your group is a very different makeup as far as you're all poets, I'm going to guess, and you're all committed to showing up. So talk a little bit about the importance of having the right group of people as your writing support.
Right. Well, I have to say I've been really fortunate in even back like pre-kids in Cambridge. I was living in Cambridge at a time that it was almost its own MFA program, and you just had these amazing writers living there, giving these really cheap workshops. Would sit around like Marie Howe's kitchen table, and that it's amazing. So, but there was a really strong group of writers, like without a book, or just kind of students, let's say that, and it was sort of an organic thing, we were all writing, and publishing then was a lot different because if there was internet, I don't know, I didn't have it. Most people didn't. You had to do the whole self-addressed stamped envelope, send it out, snail mail. You had to wait, you get it back, send it to another one. You just have the envelopes ready. So, so we were all sort of struggling in that way. My group here, what's funny is like I'm in this larger group, which sounds like your library group. It's the Salem Writers Group. It meets twice a month, Salem, Mass. At the Athenaeum. Shout out, yay. Great group of people, poets, playwrights, novelists, different levels. And we all just kind of like, everybody just kind of reads what they have. You have like 10 minutes, people throw out ideas. Within that group, though, there's a group of us, and we meet, and we are all poets, and, and are active in our publishing, and, in honing our craft to bring it out into the world on a different level. So it's very important because the expectations are higher. I go there with work and I expect people to tear it apart, or, I expect some really smart criticism. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like just the quality of.
Yeah. Yes. And, and there's, the whole, there's goodwill there. You know what I mean? Nobody's, trying to, just be sort of obnoxious about stuff.
Right. Yeah. One of the women who was talking to me about, those free groups was like, this one guy was just really fixated on my laptop. He kept telling me it was the wrong brand. He wouldn't even talk to me about my writing. He just kept giving me feedback on my laptop.
Right.
If you're not looking for the right kind of group, that's the kind of feedback you're going to end.
Exactly.
Well, it's the old adage of like, you get out of things what you put into them.
Exactly.
So it's the same kind of situation where like, if you went to a writing group and then found a different group within that group, you sought out the quality feedback, you did the extra legwork, the extra couple steps that, probably made your work much better and made their work much better because now they all have this supportive group that they can all count on each other.
Exactly.
And that's something definitely that like, I know that Annalisa tries to do in the writing gym with the people that, the people that apply and that she accepts. Right. It's a big deal. It's awesome to be a part of this group where you're getting, even though we may all write in different genres and do all these different things, there's that quality feedback and that accountability and that support that makes your writing that much stronger.
Exactly. And to know that, like the focus is on the work, and just saying like, how can this be, the best poem or the best short story, whatever you happen to be writing, and just believe, that, and, that the people in this group, that's what they want. They don't want, I hope you write a bad poem so mine comes out, you know what I mean? That's better.
So just wrapping up, we ask one question of every single guest that we have on the podcast, and that is, if you could give one piece of advice to aspiring writers, what would it be?
It would be get with a good writing group and write.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect. I love that. Yes.
Writing group.
We have some amazing writing groups that you can join. So
They're important. Well, let me say this, they work for me, so.
yeah, and as a professional poet, Jennifer, hearing that from you, that support is so necessary, even as a professional, to your success is really, really powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome. No, it's the truth, so.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Jennifer. For our listeners, we will include a link to Jennifer's website, which has all of her information, as well as where you can purchase things that she has written at www.writing-gym.com/poet. So definitely check that out. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
And thank you, Annalisa, for more of your great writing advice. Annalisa is the resident writing coach in the Writing Gym. She helps writers start, finish, and bring to publication writing in all genres, and in my opinion, is the best to be around. You could publish if you only knew how. Jennifer has given us some great tips today, writers, but look, if you love the Writing Gym podcast, if you find these tips valuable, think of how much faster your writing will get pumped into publishing shape in the Writing Gym. We take you from generating ideas to getting them on paper, from how to find an agent to how to market your book. You'll also connect with other writers who will support you and give you quality feedback, which, as we've just spoken about, is incredibly important. We even have a personal trainer, me, to help keep you accountable to your writing goals. You know how you always say, I love to write, but I just can't find the time. Well, what would it be like to have a gentle guide, someone to check in with you on how you're doing on your weekly writing goals? Well, you can, and that's me. You can get the accountability you need to make the time for writing in the Writing Gym. If you're serious about pumping your writing into publishing shape, apply now. Go to www.writing-gym.com. And thank you so much for joining us to pump up your writing here on the Writing Gym podcast. Happy writing!
This has been the Writing Gym podcast with Andy Brixey and Annalisa Parent. To join the Writing Gym, visit www.writing-gym.com.